Okay, so the 2024 election, it's really reaching a fever pitch.
Yeah.
And not just the campaigns and the rhetoric.
Right.
There's this palpable sense of anxiety,
Mm.
like something big and potentially scary is brewing.
Yeah.
Our listeners have sent in a whole stack of articles about political violence and this prepper movement.
Mm.
And honestly, it's a lot to process.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how we're seeing all of these things converge right now.
Yeah.
You've got these real-world events, data trends, cultural anxieties,
Right.
and it's all coming together to create this just perfect storm of unease.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting is that we're not just looking at, people's opinions.
Right.
We're looking at actual data on political violence.
Right.
We've got expert analysis and even stories from people who are like actively preparing for the worst.
Yeah, it's like that question everyone's asking, like, is this media hype or are we really on the brink of something dangerous?
Mm-hmm.
And if things do go south, are these preppers going to be the ones laughing from their, fortified bunkers?
Yeah.
So let's start with the current state of political violence.
Okay.
This Washington Post article, D.C. braces for post-election unrest with extra security, really sets the stage.
Uh-huh.
It's election day in D.C., and the city is on high alert.
Yeah.
Fencing extra police, a sense of foreboding.
Yeah, it's like they're preparing for a siege.
It really is.
It's such a stark contrast to what we're used to on Election Day, that usually celebratory atmosphere.
Yeah.
And, it's really hard not to think back to January 6th.
Yeah.
And that very real threat of violence that we saw emerge that day.
Uh-huh.
The Post quotes Mayor Bowser as saying, "There's a lot on the line this week."
Wow.
And they also quote a resident who just simply says, "I feel very sad that this is the state of things."
Yeah.
And I think that really sums it up, that sadness, that resignation to this new normal where elections are, potential flashpoints for violence. It's really telling.
Definitely unsettling.
Yeah.
And then we have Amelia Lester from Foreign Policy,
Yeah.
who goes even further and claims that political violence has become normalized in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
She cites recent data trends.
Mm.
But then you read the New York Times article, The Surprising Reality of Political Violence in America.
Right.
And it paints a more nuanced picture.
It does. It introduces a really interesting wrinkle.
Yeah.
They acknowledge those very real concerns about threats against officials,
Right.
but they also point out that extremist violence has actually declined since 2020.
Yeah.
And that's a data point that often gets lost in these more alarmist narratives.
Right. It's like, wait a minute, the data doesn't quite match the headlines.
Exactly.
And the Times goes on to say that even after these highly charged events like Trump's indictment and the assassination attempts, support for political violence hasn't surged in the way that people feared.
Yeah, and that's where the research of Sean Westwood, this political scientist from Dartmouth, comes in. The Times highlights his work, which found that support for political violence actually decreased among Republicans after the first assassination attempt on Trump.
Wow.
So it's this really counterintuitive finding that challenges our assumptions about how people respond to these kinds of events.
Okay, so that's a bit of a head-scratcher.
Yeah.
If the data suggests that violence isn't necessarily escalating, why are so many people on edge?
Right.
Why is there this, pervasive sense of dread hanging over everything?
Well, that's where I think we need to look beyond the numbers.
Okay.
And really kind of delve into the realm of perception, fear,
Right.
and the very human need to feel safe and in control. And that's where this whole prepper phenomenon comes into play.
Yes. The New Yorker article, The Americans Prepping for a Second Civil War,
Yeah.
takes us deep into this world.
Yeah.
And it's like stepping into an alternate reality.
It really does challenge our preconceived notions about who preppers are and what motivates them.
Yeah.
The article introduces us to Drew Miller, who's this former Air Force colonel who created Fortitude Ranch,
Okay.
which is this network of survivalist compounds.
I have to admit, when I first read about these fortified ranches, with their stockpiles of food and weapons and plans for dealing with marauders, I thought, is this real life?
Yeah.
It felt like something out of a dystopian movie.
I know. It's a stark illustration of the anxieties that are driving some segments of the population.
Yeah.
And, these aren't just isolated individuals tinkering in their basements.
Right.
The New Yorker article states that 20 million Americans are actively prepping,
Wow.
which is double the number from 2017.
That's huge.
It's a significant societal trend that I think deserves our attention.
It really does.
20 million people.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing.
It is.
It's not just a fringe movement anymore. It's
Right.
entering the mainstream.
Yeah.
But what's fueling this surge in prepping?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just a fear of a Trump loss?
Right.
Or is there something deeper at play?
Well, the New Yorker digs into that.
Okay.
And they highlight how some preppers aren't just worried about a Trump loss, but also a potential Harris win.
Oh, wow.
They believe that could lead to a backlash of, escalating tensions.
Yeah.
And ultimately societal breakdown.
Yeah.
So it's like they're bracing for chaos regardless of who wins.
It's not about left versus right.
Right.
It's about a deeper fear of instability,
Yeah.
of the system failing, regardless of who's in charge.
Exactly.
And it's not just these survivalist compounds either.
No.
The article talks about like a whole spectrum of preppers,
Uh-huh.
from those focused on food preservation and self-sufficiency
Right.
to those building fortified homesteads.
Yeah.
It's like a choose-your-own-adventure of apocalypse preparedness.
Exactly. And it's not just a rural phenomenon either.
Oh, really?
The Wall Street Journal article that we have reports that liberals are increasingly buying guns
Wow.
and joining prepper groups.
Okay.
They're feeling vulnerable, too, in a potential societal collapse.
So it's this sense of vulnerability that transcends political lines.
Right.
People are looking around thinking, hey, maybe I need to be prepared for anything.
Yeah.
But does that mean we're all headed for a full-blown civil war?
Right.
Is that the inevitable outcome of all this anxiety and prepping?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
The economists, in their article, The Risk of Election Violence in America is Real, they kind of downplay the talk of civil war, calling it overblown.
Okay.
They acknowledge that there's a risk of isolated incidents of election violence,
Right.
but they suggest that a full-scale civil war is unlikely.
So sigh of relief.
Well, not so fast,
Okay.
because then we have experts like Barbara Walter,
Right.
who paints this really chilling scenario in the New Yorker piece.
Yeah.
She argues that a Trump loss could lead to riots, assassinations,
Wow.
even state secession.
Okay.
And she suggests that this could all be fueled by foreign interference,
Oh, wow.
which adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
It really does.
It's a sobering assessment.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that, this is one expert's opinion,
Okay.
and other experts disagree.
Huh.
Chris Ellis, for instance, argues that a true civil war requires strong leadership funding
Right.
and a deeply divisive issue, like slavery was in the 1860s.
Right.
And he believes that those conditions aren't present in modern America.
Okay, so maybe muskets and battle lines aren't in our immediate future.
Right.
But the anxiety is still real.
Yeah.
People are prepping.
Mm-hmm.
They're worried. And the political climate feels incredibly volatile.
It does.
So where do we go from here?
Right.
What do we do with all this information?
Yeah.
Should we all be building bunkers and stockpiling supplies?
Well, that's a personal decision, and there's no right or wrong answer.
Okay.
But maybe instead of focusing on, physical survival,
Yeah.
we should be considering what a bug-out bag for the mind and spirit might look like.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Metaphorical bug-out bag.
Ex-
So instead of packing canned goods and bandages,
Right.
we're packing resilience,
Yeah.
critical thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Exactly. What are those essential tools and resources we need
Yeah.
to navigate these challenging times,
Mhm.
to stay grounded and hopeful when everything feels like it's falling apart?
It's about building emotional and intellectual resilience.
Yes.
It's about fostering strong relationships,
Mm-hmm.
cultivating a sense of community,
Wow.
and finding ways to stay engaged and active in shaping a positive future,
Right.
even amidst the chaos.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
It's about choosing to focus on what we can control,
Yeah.
on the actions that we can take to make a difference,
Yeah.
rather than giving in to fear and despair.
Right.
It's about remembering that we're all in this together,
Yeah.
that we share a common humanity even when our political views differ.
And perhaps, as Bradley Garrett points out in The New Yorker,
Yeah.
this shared anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
this sense of needing to be prepared for the worst,
Right.
can actually bring people together in unexpected ways.
It can.
He observed surprising cooperation between preppers of all backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
suggesting that maybe, just maybe,
Yeah.
this shared experience can help bridge some of the divides that threaten to tear us apart.
There's hope in that, isn't there?
There is.
Maybe this moment of uncertainty can be a catalyst for deeper understanding, for building bridges, for finding common ground.
Right.
It's a reminder that even in like the darkest of times, we have the power to choose resilience, hope, and connection.
Powerful stuff.
It is.
So as we navigate this election day and the uncertain times ahead, let's remember those essential tools for our metaphorical bug-out bags.
Yes.
Knowledge, critical thinking, compassion, a sense of community, and a belief in our shared humanity.
Yeah.
Those are the things that will truly sustain us.
They are.
Regardless of what the future holds. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Well,
those concerns about political violence, to the rise of the prepper movement, and all the anxieties fueling it.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is.
But, you know, I think one of the key takeaways here is the importance of perspective.
Yeah.
Yes, there are concerning trends and real risks out there, but, you know, we have to try to avoid getting swept up in those, like, most alarmist narratives.
Right. We can acknowledge that there's a potential for violence, but without, you know, assuming that it's inevitable.
Exactly.
And we can learn from the prepper movement.
Right.
Without necessarily, you know, adopting their most extreme tactics.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between responsible preparedness and unnecessary panic.
So what does that responsible preparedness look like?
Well, it starts with being informed.
Okay.
Like you are right now listening to this deep dive.
Yeah.
Understanding the issues, the data, the different perspectives.
Right.
That's essential.
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely. And then it's about taking those practical steps to mitigate risks, whatever those risks might be for you personally.
Okay.
So that could involve, you know, anything from having a plan for emergencies to strengthening your community connections to, you know, even just developing coping mechanisms for dealing with stress and anxiety.
And maybe it's also about having those difficult conversations with people who hold different views, trying to understand where they're coming from and finding that common ground that can help us move forward together.
I couldn't agree more. At the end of the day, we're all in this together.
We are.
And while we may not agree on everything, I think we can all agree that we want a future where violence and division aren't the norm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, maybe the best advice we can offer is to stay informed.
Yes.
Stay connected and stay hopeful.
Yeah.
The future may be uncertain.
It is.
But we have the power to shape it.
We do.
Both individually and collectively. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.